So much for having me, and I'm really glad to be here and to have a reach out even back to Europe. Since Charlie refused to pronounce my last name, it's a German name. I am German. It's Kirschenmann, translates into cherry man, if that's easier to pronounce. Yeah, I'm super honored to be here today, and I'm very thankful to Charlie and Megan to have taken me on as a mentee in me coming to New York City to bring our startup that we created in Germany and bring it over to the US, and as Charlie said, hopefully grow it from here as well. And the advice I've gotten already was very helpful. And for today, I thought I actually going to base this whole hour that we have together on a question. And the question is whether entrepreneurs are born or made. And if you ever have to do with entrepreneurs or people in the entrepreneurship field, that is a very common and very much debated question. Entrepreneurship is kind of near and dear to me because, yes, I'm an entrepreneur myself, but I also work with entrepreneurs all the time, as Charlie just said, and I will talk a lot more about that later as well. But so for me, that is a big question. And actually, before we get started, I actually wanted to get an idea what the opinion in the room is, or maybe in all rooms. And so maybe to clarify that question, when we talk about is an entrepreneur born or made, we basically differentiate between whether an entrepreneur has to be born with certain character traits, with certain maybe genes to make it. That's when we think they're born entrepreneurs. Or do we believe that anybody has it in them to actually be an entrepreneur, and we can make them entrepreneurs by helping them, educating people, providing training, and so on. So I'm just really curious to hear, and so if everybody who thinks entrepreneurs have to be born that way, if you could raise your hand. Not so many. The other offices. And who thinks entrepreneurs can be made? Nice. Okay, that's good. That's also, I want to say very American, but I actually also saw some hands in London. And I mean, obviously, since I, as you heard from Charlie, as my profession basically train entrepreneurs, I would definitely be in the wrong job if I didn't think that entrepreneurs could be made. But I still want to keep that question open for the moment. And what I want to do is talk about my own way to become an entrepreneur, because my way was not very straightforward, to tell you that. And then I want to talk more about what we do at the Do School. And then lastly, I also want to talk more about the entrepreneurs that we're educating and what I have seen from working with entrepreneurs all around the world, what the struggles are that they're facing, and trying to lead that back to answering the question that we start out with. And then obviously for the second part of today, I'm really curious to hear your questions and comments as well. So as promised, my story. So I was looking into some statistics also around that question of whether entrepreneurs are born or made. And what I found is that one of the key factors that influences whether or not somebody becomes an entrepreneur is whether their parents have been entrepreneurs or one of their parents have been entrepreneurs. And so looking at that, it was not very likely for me to become an entrepreneur, because actually both my parents are probably the opposite of entrepreneurs. Both my parents are German. They both worked for the German government all their life, what basically means in Germany, job security, good benefits, health insurance, retirement, totally secure. And a lot of the values that I grew up with were around security, punctuality, and so, you know, all the things that maybe you expect from a good German anyways, but that's completely, I feel, the different way from what you think about an entrepreneur, who's usually considered to be a risk taker, somebody who goes a different way. And that was not how I grew up. And so basically for me, my way was pretty clearly like get a good education, look for a secure job, and make some decent money, but don't go crazy, and have a good life. And that's what I did for a long while. So I, went to university, got my degree, started to work in some companies, and then I almost died. And I mean that quite literal. I was involved in an accident and broke my neck. What that means is that basically I broke my second cervical vertebra, and when you harm your spinal cord that high up, you die. Because your vital functions are basically all steered up there. Now you can see I didn't, but so in hospital, the one thing I heard over and over again from like nurses and doctors was like, wow, you're the most fortunate person in the world. Your chances that you're still alive are tiny. But yet I was there, and so obviously, after a while, it got me thinking, and I think it's one of the questions that is very common when something drastic happens to us, is like, the question is, why? But for me, the question was not so much, why did this happen to me? The question was much more, why did this not happen to me, in the sense of, why did I not die? And that's a pretty big question, and sometimes when I was thinking about it, I thought it's funny how we take it for granted that we're on this earth for the first time, but then when we realize in such an extreme situation, I almost felt like I was given a second chance to be here, and that was much more intense than realizing that I had been given that chance before already. And so this question why, to be honest, I couldn't really solve it, but the one thing that I figured for me was that it wasn't time for me to go, and so that must mean that I was there for a reason, and that I should be doing something relevant with my life. And then from that point, I have to say I didn't quite act on it right away. Actually, the opposite. It took me another 2 years to really have this revelation point in my life, but what I did instead, from what I hear is pretty normal as well, is when we're in an extreme situation, we want to go back to normal. All we want is everything should be like it was before. That's what I did. So I went back, I looked for a job in consulting. I worked as a financial consultant, tough environment, like high pressure, really interesting, but I was miserable, to be honest. I was really miserable. Not all the time. I mean, I think I was doing a good job and it was really an interesting time, but deep down I knew that that was not for me. And I still remember how, as I said, it took me 2 years to come back to this point. And I remember that night so clearly when I went to bed at 4 a.m. in Cologne. I had to set my alarm to 6 a.m. to catch an early flight to Hamburg. And I was so tired. I thought, my God, I have 2 hours to sleep. I don't even know how the hell I'm going to get up tomorrow. And then I thought, why am I actually doing this? I'm not enjoying this. I'm tired and I don't feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So why am I doing this? There's nobody out there that makes me do this besides myself. It's my choice, and I can change this. I can change. Nothing will happen. And that's what I did. In that very moment, I decided I quit. I quit 2 weeks later. Everybody, and in Germany, that's like insane. Like we usually leave like at least, we have like half a year notice and whatever not. So my colleagues all thought I was insane because I left without knowing what I would do afterwards. So usually when you quit as a consultant, you go into one of your clients' companies to take on a job there. And I was like, knowing that that wouldn't be my thing. So I wanted to quit and do the next thing for real. And that's now then how I started to become an entrepreneur. And as said, like I wasn't very likely to become an entrepreneur in the first place, but I'm so lucky I made that decision. I'm still so thankful to myself, to be honest, that I made that decision that night. And so I left my job, and how it is sometimes in life, an opportunity comes up. just at the right time. And that opportunity came up for me at this time, which was, and I think for me, it's probably still 2 stages to become a real entrepreneur, because the chance that I got then was to start a foundation together with my husband and a friend who had made money with his company and wanted to basically give back. And so we got a chance to do this together. And why I'm saying maybe you think this is not really the real entrepreneurship deal in the beginning is because often people consider part of entrepreneurship being the financial risk. Like, you don't know what you're going to eat next month. You don't know where your salary is going to come from. And so for me, I was probably fortunate in that sense that we had the startup capital right there. I knew where my salary would be coming from, but we were starting something from scratch, and we were starting what the Do School is now. We were actually starting that back then, which is we started to test out a new educational program for entrepreneurs, and I'm going to talk about it more in a minute. But we grew this program, and it became more and more successful. It became bigger. We had applicants from around the world, and we grew the team. And then at one stage, we had to take a decision, which then probably catapults me into more the normal entrepreneur field, is when we had to decide whether or not we would continue to run this program within the foundation and keep it a nice small program, or whether we thought we could bring this to the market. And so that's what we did. So about 1.5 years ago, we took that decision and we launched the Do School out of this great program that we had created. And so from there on, it was basically all about how can we make this happen all over again, because we needed to come up with a new model, a new operating model, a new business model. But we had the content, so that was great. And I think that kind of gets me here where I am right now in my personal way. And we've created the Do School. As said, we're currently looking into opportunities to grow the Do School into different countries. And it's been a really amazing journey. And I'm, as said, thankful to myself that I gave me the opportunity to go that way. And I know that that's what I'm here for. So that brings me to the Do School and what we're doing. So as Charlie very briefly lined out, we're basically working with emerging social entrepreneurs. And then very often people ask, what's a social entrepreneur and how is that different from a normal entrepreneur? And there's a lot of debate, and you can read papers about it and whatever not, but what I have found the key difference between a social entrepreneur and probably a regular entrepreneur is that social entrepreneurs are motivated by problems. They want to solve problems. Oftentimes, this problem solving has, in the first place, nothing to do with making money. And that's a problem, but I'm going to talk about that. Whereas then entrepreneurs that are classically considered entrepreneurs are often people that see a great opportunity in the market. They think about something that the market would need and would pay for. And so that's a clear gap right here. And what we try is to also help our social entrepreneurs to utilize the mechanisms of markets to finance their solutions to problems. And so what we're all about at the Do School is basically helping people to create innovative answers to important problems that are prevalent around the world in their communities, and put them into action. So we have developed a method of guiding people through coming from an idea to an implemented solution. And we do that in a 1-year program going through those stages with the selected groups of fellows. And so how it works in more detail is that we usually, per group that we select, which is around 20 fellows, receive about 1,500 applications from over 100 countries. So the selection process is pretty intense, and I will talk more about how we select later, looking back into my initial question. And we select a group of people as diverse as possible. So as Charlie just said, we have right now, right here in New York, we have 18 fellows from 16 different countries. They come from completely different backgrounds, from somebody who grew up on a garbage dump in Pakistan to a Canadian who probably had a really normal middle class life, as most of us maybe know it. So they come from completely different backgrounds, but they're all very driven by this one dream to create change in their communities. And we bring them in this one-year program, which consists of 2 phases. We bring them all together for the first phase, which we call the incubation phase, because it's about creating their ideas. They have to apply with the first initial idea of what they want to do, but then the incubation phase really takes them through this process of evaluating their ideas, doing research, and focusing it into a direction where they know that this idea will work within my market. Creating operating models, thinking about finances, all the fun stuff that needs to come together as well. And at the end of the 10 weeks, everybody in our group of fellows is ready to pitch, is ready to go home with a strategic plan, with a project plan, with their budgets, and is ready to basically really implement. And then once they go back home, they continue to learn online. So we have modules online for the whole year. We have a mentoring and coaching system. There's peer mentoring as well, and we're building a platform of social entrepreneurs all around the world so that also the alumni basically share their knowledge and their experience with the next groups. And so we're building the support system because one of the things we have realized is that that's the critical stage. And having the support system during the very early stages of starting up can be so tremendously helpful, because very often, yes, I mean, there are questions on what legal form should I take for my business, or how do I do a volunteer contract or something like that. So those kind of technical questions, they're good to have support with them, but much more important is on the emotional side, and it can get people so much further to just know that there's somebody that believes in them. And that's something that we didn't realize in the beginning. That was one of the things we learned, and that we try to really incorporate into the program as we have it now, is to really build the support system. And so basically, at the end of the year, every fellow that we have selected has a running organization, whether it's a nonprofit, a for-profit, a hybrid, a campaign. We don't care, as long as the person has reached the goals that they have set themselves. So that's the important part for us. And most of our fellows continue after the year as well, so we try to help them get integrated into our alumni system and all of that, but that first year is really crucial. And then the question is, or the question that we ask ourselves is, how can you teach entrepreneurship? Because yes, you can go to university and you can take a class in entrepreneurship. I did that back in the years. It didn't really help me a lot, to be honest. And why is that? Because when we thought about it, really you can only learn entrepreneurship by doing it, because you have to make all the mistakes. You have to go through a couple of processes, and you understand so much more of what's going on when you actually do it. So what we created, and that's also actually bringing me to our business model, is every group of fellows, while they're here on campus, gets presented with a challenge. And the challenge is a real life problem that's presented by any kind of organization. It could be a company, a nonprofit, a government agency, and they give a challenge that's relevant to their organization, but also to society at large. And the fellows have 10 weeks to solve that challenge. And so that takes them through the exact same stages of entrepreneurship as with their own ventures. So they go through the ideation phase. They have to go through all the research to come to a decision what kind of solution would be a good solution and a working solution. they have to plan it out, and then they have to implement it. And all of that with a team of 18 or 20 different people, which can be a challenge in itself, but it's a huge learning experience. And we help them to reflect on all these experiences, to take the tools and the skills they need out of this to then transfer it to their own ventures, to make their own ventures more successful. And how is that connected to our business case? Well, we're not charging tuition. This is because most of our students could not afford the tuition. And so in that sense, we're a classic hybrid model ourselves, because we have created a service, our education, but our consumers, our beneficiaries, are actually not our customers because they cannot pay for it. And so what we have created instead is basically a second customer base, which is the organizations that give the challenges. And so any organization that wants to work with us that has an interesting problem and they want 20 smart people from all around the globe to work on it for them for 10 weeks, basically can partner with us, give that challenge, and in return, they pay the tuition for our students. So they also have the benefit that they have this great 1-year follow-up. They can see the impact that they're making all around the world. Yeah, that's a model that we just developed basically when we took the decision to take the Do School out after the Katherin Friends Foundation. That's one of the key things that we're working on at the moment, and that I'm also working on actually with Charlie and Megan in framing that product basically. The great thing for us is that we can basically create impact into organizations and with each of our fellows. So that's, for us, we're impact driven, so for us that's also a great opportunity to scale that impact. Now to come to the third part that was going to look into also more into the question I raised, whether entrepreneurs are born or made. I want to talk about two things. One is the selection on how we select our fellows. And then the other is, I just want to share a couple of stories and common topics that people around the world are facing when they're starting out as entrepreneurs. And that also concludes my view on things with born or made. So when we look for fellows, we definitely look for specific characteristics. So that's my take on the born thing. Because yes, I think people do need to show a couple of things, even maybe in infant stages, but they need to be there to make sure that people can succeed as entrepreneurs. And so what we look for, the first thing we look for is passion and motivation. That's so important. And the great thing is that when I read applications, I'm always amazed and I'm always moved by the passion and the drive and the motivation to create change that I see all around the world by people who send in their applications. So reading applications is actually a great privilege for me. The other thing we look for is drive for achievement. We need to be able to see that somebody can achieve a goal that they set themselves. That goal in the beginning doesn't have to be huge. It can be smaller, and but that's where we can come in and help people to also reach bigger goals. But that sense of being able to set a goal and find out how to get there and achieve it, and a drive to actually achieve it, that needs to be there, and then we can build on that. The third thing we're also looking for is creativity and the potential to come up with ideas and with potential solutions. And so everybody who applies to the Do School has to apply with a concrete idea for their venture that they want to implement. And we're very open for people to add on to that idea or to maybe change that idea during the first weeks when they're with us. But we need to see the potential that somebody can locate a problem and can be creative in coming up with potential solutions. And again, all of that is basically to give them a base that we can work with. And then that's the second part of our program. And as said, if I wasn't convinced that entrepreneurs can be made as well, I would definitely do the wrong job, because that's what I spent a lot of my energy on. And I see it work. So that's the nice part. I see the people go through our programs from an application to implementing, and I see people, like for example, George from Uganda. George was abducted as a child soldier when he was 14, when there was a war in northern Uganda. He was able to actually flee after a couple of weeks. He fled with a friend. His friend was killed on the way back home, and he barely survived. And back home for George meant the next 10 years of life in an internally displaced people camp. And he experienced the dreadful conditions in those camps firsthand: sanitation, illness, people dying, people living in totally cramped little shacks, basically, nothing to do, alcohol, whatever you want. And so George felt the passion and the motivation to do something about that. He applied to the Do School because he didn't really know how and what and how to approach this. And now George is an entrepreneur in northern Uganda who is rehousing people from those IDP camps. He has 20 employees. He is constantly giving skill trainings to new people that work with him on building houses. He brings people back to where they came from, because most people actually own land, but they don't own houses. So to bring them back to their own land, they need somebody who can give them a house. But he doesn't give them the house. He works with a revolving fund model. So everybody who gets rehoused also participates in an agricultural training program that he has set up that helps them to gain their livelihood and eventually pay back the price for the house over 5 years, so that he can then build more houses. And so now George has been doing that for the last 3 years and has rehoused more than 500 people. And he will continue to do that for, I hope, a long time. There's somebody right here in New York, for example, Mohammed from Pakistan. He grew up in a slum. He grew up picking garbage, going through garbage to sort out stuff that he could sell to middlemen. Not very uncommon in a lot of countries, actually. He made his way up. He is the first person in his family to have received some form of education. He's here in New York right now because he's passionate and motivated to change something in his community. What he has seen firsthand is that people die because of waterborne diseases because there's no toilets and sanitation. So he's right now developing a concept for mobile toilets that will also produce biogas for energy. So that's just a couple of examples so you know what we're working with, like what kind of passion we have in our groups, but also what the potential is that those people can, when they're using it the right way, the impact they can create around the world. And as I said, that's really amazing for me to work with these people. And the one thing that is, I think, really relevant for them. So I have one more question for you guys. Like, when you hear those stories, like, what do you think when we talk about obstacles for those people, for those entrepreneurs? What are the key obstacles they're facing? Let's say the top 3. What do you think? Any ideas? Funding, always on top, yes. Funding, huge problem, yes. Sorry? The connections, also an important one. Political instability. Sorry? Political instability. Yes, political environment. And those are all always on our lists. But there's one more, and that's a key obstacle for a lot of our fellows is family pressure. So convincing the people around you that what you're doing is actually sensible, because a lot of the fellows that we have in our programs are the first ones in their families that have received higher education, and the pressure from the families is huge. The families want these kids to succeed in conventional jobs because they want them to care for the family as well. And so to be able, and I think that's one of the other key characteristics to come back to what we're looking for is kind of resilience, probably, to be able to deal with that kind of pressure that's very personal. So pressures within a country can be really tough as well, but for them it's very personal. It's your mom telling you, oh, but I thought you're gonna help me and dad with surviving, basically. Why are you not taking a job? Why are you taking this risk? And so that's one key thing that a lot of our fellows are dealing with, and that I think is very, very interesting to see how they cope with it. And I think it's also something that that's also true for me as an entrepreneur and for a lot of entrepreneurs that I speak with. And actually, no matter whether they're social entrepreneurs or normal entrepreneurs, is to keep up the optimism that in the long run, your vision will succeed and that you will be able to make it happen. But in the short term, still be able to deal with the fact that you might just be taking the wrong turn, and you might need to listen to people around you to be sure that you're taking the right turn. And so to kind of never lose touch between the big vision that you want to achieve and the actual steps that you're taking right now to get there. And so for me, the conclusion for this question that I put out in the beginning is really, I think both needs to come together. I think you need to have a base to work off on, but I think, as I said, like some of the things can totally be in the infant stages, and with the right skills, the right support system, the right tools, we can absolutely make entrepreneurs. And so that's my conclusion on this question, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts or questions on any part of this.